Hi and welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast for another Authors Tuesday. So it's great to have another guest here today, Réaltán Leannáin. Réaltán is writes a lot of books as Gaeilge in Irish. So I'm really looking forward to talking to Réaltán today. So thanks a lot for coming on today, Réaltán.
Gurmaget, you're very welcome, Mark. I'm
Yeah,
delighted
no,
to be with you.
thank you. Thanks very much. It's a real treat for the listeners. So we'll probably start the podcast. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and the books you've written, please? Because it's very interesting. You've written a lot of books as Gaeilge in Irish. So I'm dying to hear about it because I'm a big fan of the language as well. Thank you.
Well, I think it's gas in a way because I wasn't brought up with Irish up in Belfast. And there was no Irish in school up in Belfast until you went to secondary. And I hated Irish when I first started it because that was way back in the 70s when I started secondary. And you got taught Irish in those days by, this is the grammar, learn the grammar. Those are a few words, put them into the sentences in the grammar. And I can hear my kids going, Jesus, Ma, you're going all nerdy on us now. Anyway, I hated Irish at the beginning, and then I went to a Gaeltacht course because we were deprived children from inner city Falls Road, Belfast, and we needed taken out of the bad atmosphere and environment we were in. And as it happened, I went to do a Gaeltacht course, which totally transformed my whole attitude to the language because I could see it being spoken by ordinary people. Like, pass the potatoes. It's time to put the lights out and go to bed, you lot. You know, all the little things, they were all natural, ordinary Irish. And then I came back, and then at the end of September, the Irish teacher says, okay, a few of you were at Irish College this summer. Right, okay, here's envelopes for you. You've just given to your ma's at home. And it turned out the Irish American Fund was after giving us the price of what our parents had paid for those courses. And do you know what? It was like Christmas for my mother. She got all this money back, and literally it did pay for Christmas. She was delighted, absolutely delighted. So anyway, look, so that's how it started, and there was no stopping me because I do like to say this was Belfast in the 70s. And I was a teenager at a Catholic girls' school. And you know what? There was no way I was going to get out that door with all the trouble going on out in the streets. There was no way my mother was going to let me down to the local disco because she knew that they drank cider at the back of the hall in the disco. And so she sent me down to the Ceilidh down in the local Irish club, Common Clonard. And she knew she could trust people there because there'd be adults there that she knew all her life who'd be keeping an eye on what was going on, and they'd report back to Bridget if there was any problem. So Bridget sent me to the Ceilidh. The only thing was you had to speak Irish in the Ceilidhs.
Okay.
So if I wanted to meet a boy between the age of 12 and 20, I had to go down there. So you had to learn Irish if you wanted to get out of the house. It was either that or sit and watch reruns of the Magnificent Seven from then until you were able to get away from the house when you were working, you know. So that's how it started, really. I mean, I what happened was I got a group of friends, all based around the same place. We all spoke in Irish, and we all got into the Irish, and there was no stopping us then. And most of the people in that group either went on to become Irish teachers or work in Irish. One of them is if you want a lawyer who will do all your work through Irish, he's the man to go to. Another guy is in charge of newspapers, and he makes sure to put Irish articles in his papers. Sorry, there was another girl at the time, woman, and she's one of the main Irish writers up north as well. So we've all stayed with it, every single one of us, you know, which was interesting. But I think part of it was time, because you had the British Army and Stormont and everybody going, no, yous can't talk Irish. So we went, yes, we can.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was a little bit of that. So anyway, so that was fine. And then as it happened, I fell into Irish teaching when I moved down south, because to be honest, I did a degree in Irish. My name is in Irish because you had to make a decision up north at one stage. You go with Irish or you go with English. You can't have both up north, full stop.
Yeah.
So my name was in Irish. My address was was down up the Falls Road, literally Falls Road. And my degree was in Irish. There was no way I was going to get a job at the end of the 70s, early 80s in Belfast in the north. So I came down to Dublin. I started looking after kids with a family. They were a lovely family. Like, I mean, I really enjoyed my time with them until they broke up. So that was the end of that job. And I fell into teaching. I did a stint as I was the first female manager of Club Conran na Gaeilge back in the early 80s, down Harcourt Street. And that lasted until I realized that the money wasn't really paying for the rent. So that was the end of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so fell into teaching, did teaching for many, many years. And then I got cancer.
God.
And I had to rethink everything. Because it was very obvious that I wasn't going to be able to go back into classrooms full of rambunctious teenagers. I just wouldn't have the energy for it.
Yeah.
So while I was going through chemo and all the rest, sick as a dog, weak as whatever, all of a sudden I started writing little bits and pieces on backs of envelopes and this and that and the other. And from that, I developed a poetry collection called Turas Elche, Poetry Journey, or Cancer Journey. And that's where it all started then. And I decided, right, well, I don't have the energy to go back teaching. I'm going to be on hormone tablets for 5 years, at least, that are just going to sap me. So I might as well try and do something with it that I don't have to get up and physically do. And I went down the writing route, and I joined a writing group in my local library. That's an ordinary public library. And if you ask ordinary public libraries, a lot of them will have writing groups. Unfortunately, it was in English, which meant that I was writing stuff in English for them. They were coming back and critiquing it. And then I had to go and rewrite it when I felt that it was somewhere where I wanted it to be in Irish. But the problem is, once you translate your own story, especially into Irish, it changes a wee bit, and you start changing other things. So it added on extra time. So as well as that, I was also going to classes, and it's well worth going to a few good writing classes.
That's great.
There's loads of so between the two of them, I started getting there. And then Irish writers have what they call a mentorship scheme, because the usual, there are mentorship schemes in English language, like Poetry Ireland does one. Words Ireland has moved actually to the Irish Writers Centre. But if you want to get mentored in Irish, there is a particular scheme you can go with. And I applied for it, got a mentor, lovely guy, Dermot Summers. We would meet and have a coffee, and he would look at very specific little small things. We wouldn't take a whole story apart. We just take little things and look at them. And at the end of the day, then I came out with a book of short stories.
Great.
And then moved on from then. And I've had a few other books since, short stories. I did one novel, which was more labour of love than anything. Because my dad's dad, my granda, from Monaghan originally, he joined the army in the First World War, because Redmond said, if you join the army, you'll go and you'll get yourself free state when you come back, and we'll have, or not free state, but we'll have self-rule. So he went off, joined the army, went off to Europe, came back. Of course, 1916 had happened in the meantime. That was, you know, any kind of or sort of home government off the rails. And so he saw the way things were, came out of the army, joined the IRA as it was then, and took all his newly acquired gun making skills and gun putting together and storing skills to use as the quartermaster of his local IRA unit in Belfast. And what he also did was he brought back a mail order bride from Malta, because he was stationed over there for a while. He decided that the Maltese women, they were nice, they were docile, they were submissive, they were Catholic. They would do him very well. Thank you very much to make his dinner. Didn't matter which one, anyone would do. Brought one back, and that was my granny. By the way, that marriage wasn't really the best. But anyway, so anybody who's thinking about mail order brides, to be honest, darlings, would you ever just catch a grip? Anyway, so anyway, the story is a very fictionalized version of that. And I've taken in a lot of things that I did an awful lot of research on First World War and women in the First World War, because it's really about my granny.
Wow, yeah.
She came over from Malta. She hardly spoke a word of English. She spoke Maltese. She came over with all her light, hot country clothes to Belfast. God love her. Not even Dublin. Belfast. Belfast was grim in those days. It was burgeoning, and it was the biggest growing city in the United Kingdom as it was at the time, including Dublin. But I'm telling you, it was grim. It was coal. It was coal smoke. It was cobbles everywhere. It was horse shit everywhere, because they didn't remember most things were horse drawn. And there she is, landing in her Maltese sort of. It's like when the Spaniards come over here for the summer, first thing they do is go down to the Donegal shop and buy themselves jumpers. First thing she did was get herself a shawl.
So you got a lot of your stories from that. That's great. Like, a lot of research went in there.
Yeah. And actually, a lot of my short stories as well are based in Belfast. And again, they're based on little things that happened, but they're fictionalized. They're fictionalized. So there's a lot of the troubles in them, for instance. And I think a lot of writers they mine their own life stories at the beginning. And I'm no different. There's a lot of my life stories, but again, they're fictionalized. And this is the thing to remember, that somewhere along the road, you can actually feel a story morphing from this is my story to this is a story. This is no longer the story of me. It is its own story. And you can actually, I'm at that stage at the moment with another story, and I can actually see it transforming into fiction.
Right. Yeah. And what are the name of your books as well? And where can people buy them?
Okay. Right. Well, I'd say if people want to start, I suppose the best one would be Geelish. Okay. I can send these on to you afterwards. All right.
Yeah, please. That'd be great. Yeah.
I'll send them on to you. Geelish is a short story book, and another one is Innie. Okay. Innie.
Yeah.
And you'll find out why it's called Innie in the first story, and they're both short stories. And then Kitty Nagarty is the Maltese one. Kitty is the name of the person. Kitty Nagarty, because she reads the cards, which was a very, I suppose over here in Ireland, we look at it and we think of it as something very exotic and not quite right, something you do in secret. Whereas over in Malta, if you open any kitchen drawer, you'll find tarot cards. And their tarot cards, it's like you open a kitchen drawer here and you have a pack of cards for maybe having a game of gin rummy or poker or patience. And they have the tarot cards instead. It's just the way it is. So it's Kitty Nagarty, And actually, I must tell you, just last year, myself and one of my publishers, we put out an anthology of short stories, 28 short stories by all different writers. And some of them are well known, and some of them have only ever written by maybe 2 or 3 stories in their lives, but they're good, which is grand. But they're
Yeah.
also available, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this to you, but they're also available on podcast. So
Okay.
we put out a new story each month, as well as the
Brilliant.
book. We put out a new story each month with an actor reading them. And then we have a small discussion with the actor about the actual story. And the text is there as well. So you can follow for anybody who particularly isn't maybe very confident about Irish, they can read the text and listen to the actor reading it at the same time.
Oh wow, that's great, isn't
You
it?
know? Yeah.
Yeah.
This particular publisher, Ev Lloyd, yeah,
Mm.
he has some marvelous ideas, you know.
Yeah, you might send me a link to that as well, so I can
I'll
share it as
send you
well, please.
all, yes, I'll send you all
Yeah,
the
yeah,
links.
because I'll be
The
interested in that myself. I'll be interested in that myself. Yeah.
I would say actually the best way to get access to any of these things, there's 2 ways. One is to order books. There's shoppa.ie, and that's the
Okay.
shop down in Harcourt Street. So
Oh yeah.
shoppa.ie. Not
Great.
not and you can cut this a bit out if you want, Mark, not sexshoppa.ie, which is a different kind of shop.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know. Yeah, yeah.
and, and I'll tell you a story about that if you want. But anyway, shoppa.ie, or you can go on to, I have a blog, and on the right hand side, it has links to where you can buy all the books, of
Yeah,
course.
great stuff. Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant. No, it's great that that's a great story that you're telling there about, something that tragic that happened to you, and
Yeah.
and you found your niche, so to speak, from that. Like that's great that's happened for you.
Well, it's interesting because in many ways, like people think something like that's like serious illness, that it happens. And, people were saying, oh my God, what are you going to do? Oh, this is terrible. And I'm sitting there going,
Yeah,
oh, for God's sake, I'm not dead yet.
exactly. That's a way to look at things. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And yeah,
Yeah,
and I never would have had the time to write if I'd still been teaching, because you
yeah,
get
yeah.
home at the end of the
I
teaching
know.
day and you're just, go away, go away,
I
leave me
know. Yeah,
alone.
I
you
know.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's great crack. And it's nice as well to have that connection with Belfast still, because
Yeah.
I think
Oh,
people
great.
in Belfast are very sort of, I opened up a few doors for other people who are writing in Irish at the moment to actually write about their experiences as well.
Great, isn't it? That's great,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. And just to ask you as well, this is great. What do you have a strategy that you use when you're writing? Like, would you write a certain amount of words a day, or what way would you do it yourself, Réaltán?
I do right. I'm going to give you advice that I do not always cling to myself. It
Okay.
is it is good to keep writing at least 20 minutes, half an hour a day. I think
Mm,
it keeps
yeah.
you it keeps you in the zone, and it's very
Hmm.
easy to fall out of it. Like during COVID there, I don't know about anybody else, but I froze at the beginning of COVID and I stopped writing, and it took me a
Hmm.
long time to get back into it properly.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you can, you should do at least half an hour a day, more, as much as you can. But don't
Hmm.
write to the stage where you're exhausted, because then you'll find it too hard to pick up the next day.
Mm,
That's what I find myself. I don't know about yourself,
yeah.
but I
Yeah.
always I always write a certain amount. And then another thing I find which helps a lot is exercise, whether it's walking or swimming or whatever, because your mind starts turning, and all of a
Mm,
sudden you say to yourself, yeah, I'll have to make a note of that and work on that either later on tonight or tomorrow, or
Yeah.
So exercise as well, getting away from it. You need to get away from it. It gives you
Yeah,
perspective,
definitely.
you know?
Definitely, yeah. No, that's great advice. Thanks a lot, Réaltán. That's brilliant.
Uh,
And like, because it was actually funny. I was going to ask you that about COVID, like, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask you.
oh,
Like you feel,
yeah, I
yeah,
was like a rabbit in the headlights
yeah,
for a good while. I actually find it was as well that I had actually already come up with this idea to put the anthology together, because I mean, this is the thing. The hardest part is getting stuff down on a blank page,
mm-hmm,
because I
yeah,
find, especially taking other people's stories and working through them and going through the editing process with them was much easier than having to write something down myself, you
okay,
know?
yeah,
So once you have something down, the hardest part is writing on the blank
mm,
page.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I once overheard two translators, they translated stuff into Irish, and they were busy sitting in a corner complaining about, well, nobody, like, I mean, they're always talking about Thoreau this or Depardieu that or blah, 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 whoever they translated from, and they're marvelous and they're great. And what about us? And I thought, well, you're not the ones that sat down with a blank page. You
mm-hmm,
know, it's a different skill. So,
yeah,
and like that, editing is a different skill. And
mm-hmm,
but it's one that has to be done again and again and again. And you have to go over and over and over. And then you send it into your editor, the publisher. And then the publisher comes back and goes, well, now. And you think you're finished. You're only started.
I know, I know, yeah, good,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
no,
the blank page is the hardest part, and get as much as you can down, because
yeah,
nobody writes well. People edit well. They don't write well.
yeah, yeah, I agree
That's
with you, yeah.
yeah.
Definitely, yeah. Because like I know, like you're saying that COVID, like the last 2 years have been very hard for everybody. But
Mm.
have you written much during COVID? Have you got many? Have you got any books out since in the last 2 years?
Well, during COVID, I got two books out,
Oh,
but they
very
weren't
good.
started. They weren't started in COVID.
Oh,
That's the
okay.
thing. And I noticed. So one was my own book of short stories, which was already at the publisher editing stage, and he was already
Mm,
coming back to me with things. So that was Innie. The other one was the anthology Blána Dulach. And again, because I was at the editing stage with that, because people sent in stories they had already written, it
mm,
wasn't as hard. Now, I'm actually I'm actually going through something which I should have had done. I should have had done by Christmas last, just gone. This is
mhm.
now April. Um, and I'm only getting to grips with it now, because I find it very hard to sit down and get the words down on the blank page. But
Yeah,
it's coming now, and you can see it taking shape, and you can
great
see it
stuff.
morphing into whatever it's morphing into. But I'm not the only person. I know for a good while there, people were sort of, they weren't discussing this at all. And then all of a
Mhm.
sudden, all it takes is for one person to turn around and say, yeah, oh, look, I was couched during COVID. I couldn't cope at all. And
Mm,
all of a sudden, the whole room opens up.
yeah,
And
yeah.
everybody realizes that they weren't the only one who was
Mm,
stuck, who was frozen, who couldn't get a word out, you know?
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, no, COVID was, I think it was the anxiety and
Mm,
fear that people felt at the beginning. And
yeah.
then I think staying at home, and for instance, I there were days when I would hardly put a foot over the door, you know,
Mm,
and I'm sure a lot of people were the same. And I'm in the vulnerable group as well. So
okay. Yeah.
I was thinking about saying to you just before this started, I just recently got COVID,
I
and
know.
we're at
I
the
know.
tail end,
Yeah, totally.
and I wouldn't want it back again. So I know that at the beginning I probably would not have got through. And I'm
Mm,
sure you're the same, Mark. You realize anyone who's had COVID,
mhm.
anyone who can come through and say, oh, yeah, it's just like the flu, my God, they're the lucky ones. They
God,
really
yeah,
are,
definitely, yeah, yeah.
you know.
No, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we've turned a corner, so to speak, with it.
Yeah.
Things are, yeah, thankfully.
Fingers
But I
crossed.
did,
Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Well, thankfully you're okay after it yourself,
Well,
and
both of
yeah,
us. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
as well as that, how do you keep yourself motivated as well?
I
Tom,
think
like,
I think you have to plan.
mhm,
Uh, Number one is you have to plan what you're going to do in the future. So, for instance, I'm writing one book at the minute, but I have another book planned out after that.
mhm,
That's one way. Another way is to make sure that you have deadlines. So if I say to a publisher, if I contact you maybe next January with a script, then you have to have something ready for him.
yeah, exactly.
Deadlines, I think work very well with me. Whip, whip, whip. Come on
Yeah.
there, get working. The other thing is the bit of writing every day, because if
Mm,
you stop writing, you you do, yeah, you can feel yourself drying up, sort of motivation wise, and you just
mm,
get, uh, I'll have a
yeah,
few more weeks and then I'll start in. I'll do it tomorrow.
exactly. Yeah,
Tomorrow's great.
yeah.
you know.
You start procrastinating.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yeah. So keeping going a wee bit every day.
That's great
Um,
advice. Yeah,
I think that is the main man, really. You know.
yeah, yeah, exactly. No, that's great. And what's your favorite books to read yourself? And I suppose inspired you the most in your writing.
I think in Irish there are two authors that I keep going back to,
Mm,
and they're not new contemporary authors. They're fairly old, but um, there's a guy, Seamus Agrena, also wrote under the pen name Myra. Um, he was the first person that I could sit down and read a book like it was a Mills and Boon.
yeah.
Easy to get through, absorbing. You wanted to know what happened at the end.
Mm,
And I mean, all of Myra's books I loved. And some of them are in new Roman modern script. Some of them are in the old Irish script. But it was the best. Actually, it was the best thing I ever did with my time after college. After college, I spent 6 months on the dole in Belfast,
oh
and
God.
I would read a book a night of his
Mm,
in the old script, because I just said to myself, I have to do something,
yeah, yeah,
constructive.
yeah.
And it was the best thing ever. So anyway,
I,
that's one person, Moira Seamus Agrena.
mm,
The other
yeah.
person
I
is
think he was. I think. Sorry to cut across you. I think he was involved in the Oris group that I do every week. I think he joins in that because it sounds familiar, the name.
This is an older Seamus Agrena who's dead now.
Okay. Oh, sorry. So he's definitely
Ask him.
not.
Well, he
Sorry.
might he might be related. He
Yeah,
might be
because
related
he
because,
goes by Mara as well. That's why just the name rang a bell.
oh, tell him you found him out. You know why he's doing that.
Yeah.
That's why he's doing
Wow.
that. Yeah,
Wow, that's incredible. Now, just
yeah,
because
yeah.
when I just sorry to cut across you, but I just
No,
remembered that from earlier on. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's exactly why he's doing it, because the original Seamus Agrena called himself Myra. They all give
Wow.
themselves little pseudonyms. Don't ask me why, but anyway, they did.
Mm,
So that's one person, and the other person is
yeah.
Pádraig O'Conor. Now, if
Okay.
you think about Irish writing at that time, or not just Irish, English as well, at the turn of the sort of 19th, 20th century, people wrote very flowery and lots of words. And why use one word when we can use three? And Pádraig O'Conor cut straight through that and wrote simple, simple, simple language. And
Mm,
you look at his stories and you think, that's just a wee story. And then you realize it's much more than a wee story.
mm,
And it's so straightforward, but there's so much in it. And I love that. Let's cut through the crap, guys. You know.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
actually I love his style as well. You know.
Mm,
I suppose in English, people like Alice Munro. Again,
okay.
I
Yeah.
love the straight, tell it to your face. Let's not have
Mm,
any of the flowery. I do like some flowery language as well, but
yeah.
yeah, but people like Alice Munro and Catherine Mansfield, lovely
Right.
writers,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, that's great.
They're-
What was your? Sorry, just to just give you mind, just repeating, Kirsty. I'm interested in that myself. The second last Irish writer you mentioned there, so I can just take a note of it.
Which one, Pádraig O'Conor or
Yeah,
Seamus
yeah.
O'Grana? I'll
Seamus
write them.
O'Grana.
Yeah, Seamus O'Grana. I'll write them up on the.
The
Oh,
notes here.
sorry,
Yeah,
on
that's
the chat. If I can get them back.
yeah, that'd be great. Thanks a lot.
Seamus
Oh, great.
O'Grana.
Seamus O'Grana. Yeah, great
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks very much. Because I know what you're saying earlier on as well about writers groups. They're really good, aren't they? Because I'm involved in one myself.
Fabulous.
Yeah, because we do what's known as prompts every week, where you have a half an hour to write off a prompt that Harry
Yeah.
would put up, like, you know. And do you work off prompts yourself in your group, or I find them really really good.
Um, sometimes we do, but not an awful lot. What generally happens in the group I'm in, and by the way, it's a Zoom group, so anyone around the country, we have people from all around the country coming in.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
And anyone who wants to join, they're very welcome. So what
Brilliant.
happens is, yeah, generally people send stuff in for critique, and we do critique.
Okay.
I have, when I was in Lucan Library, we did a lot of prompting, and quite a lot of the courses that I've done in the past, there have been a lot of prompts. I think they're great. I'll just say one thing about them. People do something from a prompt, and it does tend to be very good because you're coming at it fresh.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
coming at it gung-ho. However, never ever put it at the very beginning of whatever story you're working on. That's one thing I find, because your style changes slightly as you work through it. That's number one. And number two, it always seems to fit a little bit in.
Yeah.
Somewhere around the first third, but not at the very beginning.
No,
You know?
that's funny you should say that, because I was only working on one yesterday, and I found that like it was halfway through it before I actually used the prompt. So yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, one thing I've noticed was doing the other podcast with the actors who are reading the stories. One thing I've picked up from my publisher, who's done an awful lot of acting work himself as well, he never gets them to read straight. He gets them to start to read and to read and to read, and then to go back, because that's when their voice has warmed up. And it's like your writing voice as well, the prompt. It's not your, it's the start and it's the warm up, but it's not your actual writing voice, you know. It's probably more polished than your actual writing voice, to be honest. So yeah, so take it out, and whenever you're writing a story, and this, I suppose, a short story, and this is a very good technique for short story, is when, say you have a draft of a short story, take away the beginning, take away the ending. Just, you know, delete them. You'll have a copy saved, but delete them. And then look at it and then say to yourself, do I need the beginning? Because very often the beginning, people begin a short story and really they should begin at a very later stage. And then the ending, very often the ending can be cut, because the very, very last paragraph, very often, not always, will tend to be a little bit of an explanation, and then they lived happily ever after. Whereas you don't necessarily need that.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah, brilliant. No, it's absolutely brilliant talking to you today, Réaltán, and I wish you all the success as well going forward with your writing. You know,
straight back at you, Mark. And it was lovely. It was lovely talking to you today. You know,
absolutely brilliant. Yeah, and then make sure you send all your links as well, so I can share them on the show notes as well. And then it'd be great if you could give us the link to that podcast as well. I'd be very interested in that as well.
Oh, well, that one's easy. You just put in blah.ie into, and it's great. I know it's put a fada on the but you know yourself, that's just autocorrect.
Yeah,
and but you wouldn't put a fata in on the. But sure, I'll send you all the links anyway.
Brilliant.
And
Okay, so thanks again, Réaltán. It's been great talking to you.
Mark, it has been a pleasure.
Yeah.
And I hope someday we might meet for a cup of coffee.
Definitely. But so that was
COVID.
real. Yeah, definitely. Réaltán Leannáin, isn't it? Leannáin? Yeah,
Yep,
Leannáin.
that's me.
So yeah, great. Okay, so thanks again, everybody, for tuning in today's podcast, Mark's Motivational Podcast, Authors Tuesday. So join us again for another episode on Thursday. Take care. Thanks, Réaltán. Thank you.